I had not said my daughter's name out loud in 2 years, and I was about to learn that a child can break a grown man open with nothing but a stubborn hand and the word stay. It was the third week of October when the noon train let off its only passenger at Ledger Crossing, and I was there for a barrel of nails and a sack of coffee and nothing else. I'd have told you my heart was buried up on the rise behind the house, under the cottonwood, in the same ground that held my wife. I'd ridden the Stillwater Range alone for 2 years with that grave on my back, and I'd made my peace with carrying it the rest of my days. A man gets so he can mistake numbness for peace if he holds still enough. So I wasn't watching the platform. I was loading the wagon, my back to the depot, when I heard the train pull out and a small commotion behind it, boot heels, the squeak of a trunk dragged over planks, and then nothing. Just the wind off the Rhone range coming down cold and the depot bell knocking once on its hook. When I turned, there was a woman standing alone in the middle of the platform with a carpet bag in one hand and a steamer trunk at her feet, and she was looking up and down the empty street like she expected somebody to step out of the dust and claim her. Nobody did. The wagons that had come for the freight rolled off. The depot man went back inside and shut his window. And she stood there in a gray traveling dress gone shiny at the elbows. A plain woman, neither young nor old, with her chin held level and her gloved hands gripping that bag like it was the last solid thing in the territory. I knew who she was the way the whole town knew. Ledger Crossing had wired back east in the spring for a schoolteacher, on account of the old one, Miss Prout, having married a freighter and gone south. The council had picked this one off a stack of letters because she'd asked the least money. Then over the summer the new families that had been promised the school pulled up stakes for the silver camps, and the council, being the council, decided a school of 9 children wasn't worth a teacher's wage after all. They'd written her to say so. The letter must have crossed her on the road. I knew all that, and I knew it wasn't my trouble, and I climbed up on the wagon seat meaning to drive home. She was still standing there when I'd turned the team. The light was already going gold and long. There's a kind of cold that comes into the Stillwater Valley after the equinox that doesn't announce itself. It just settles into your bones while you're looking the other way, and a person in a thin gray dress with no fire to go to could be in real trouble by dark. I told myself somebody from the council would come. I told myself the drover's house would take her in on credit. I told myself a dozen things, and the team took 3 steps down the street, and then I heard her say, to no one, in a clear, steady voice that didn't shake, "Well, I shall have to think this through." And she sat herself down on her own trunk, folded her hands in her lap, and began, by every appearance, to think it through. There was no tears in it. That's what turned me. I'd have driven off from a woman crying. A man can convince himself that someone weeping has the strength to weep, and so will manage. But she sat there with her spine straight and her face calm and only her hands betraying her, the gloves working at each other in her lap, and I understood that she had no notion of where she would sleep that night and was too proud to let the empty street see her afraid. I am not a kind man. I'd have told you that then and meant it. But there are some things a man can't drive away from and still call himself a man, and a woman set adrift on a cold platform in a town that had decided it didn't want her, that was one of them. I turned the team around. "Ma'am," I said when I'd pulled up alongside, "you'd be the teacher." She looked up at me and I saw her take my measure in one glance, the dust on me, the gray at my temples, the rifle in its boot, and decide I was not a danger and not particularly a friend. "I was to have been," she said. "It appears the position has dissolved while I was in transit. I am told this happens." She said it dry, like a fact about the weather. "Adeline Wren." "Caleb Marsh." I looked at the sky, which had no patience in it. "There's a hotel of sorts, the drover's house. They'll want money up front and they water the soup." "Then I shall economize on soup." She stood and reached for the trunk, and got it perhaps 4 inches off the planks before her arms told her the truth of it. I got down and lifted it onto the wagon bed before I decided to. "It's a fair walk," I said. "I'll carry you that far. The hotel's at the end." She hesitated, and I will tell you what I saw in that hesitation, because I came to know it well. She was counting whether the cost of accepting help from a strange man was higher or lower than the cost of refusing it. A woman alone learns to do that arithmetic fast. She must have come out where I needed her to, because she let me hand her up, and she sat very straight on the seat with a foot of cold air between us, and we rode down the length of Ledger Crossing in a silence that wasn't unfriendly, only careful. The drover's house had a vacancy and a price, and she paid it from a small purse that I could tell, without looking, did not have many more such prices left in it. I carried her trunk to the foot of the stairs. At the door she turned and put out her hand, gloved, businesslike. "Thank you, Mr. Marsh. You needn't have." "No," I agreed and shook it and went home. I want to be honest about that first day because of what came after. I did not ride home thinking of her. I rode home thinking of the nails and the coffee and the fence on the north line that the elk had walked down, and somewhere underneath all of that, the way you carry a stone in your boot for a mile before you'll stop to take it out. I rode home thinking what I always thought, which was, Ruth would have known what to do for that woman. Ruth would have had her at our table within the hour. And then the next thought, the one I'd worn smooth as a creek rock. And Ruth is dead, and that is your doing, and you don't get to be the man who knows what to do anymore. The house was dark when I came in. June was where she always was, on the floor by the cold stove with the rag doll her mother had made, not playing with it, just holding it, watching the door. 6 years old that fall and small for it. She had Ruth's eyes and Ruth's dark hair, and since the fever took her mother, my daughter had gone nearly silent, not from any sickness the doctor could name, but the way a creek goes silent when the water drops below the stones. She'd speak if she had to. Yes, Pa, no, Pa, she did her chores like a little soldier. But the chatter, the singing, the 100 questions a small girl is supposed to ask, all that had drained out of her into the same ground that took her mother. And I, who could not even look at my own grief straight on, did not know how to call it back up out of her. I'd hired women. A man with a motherless child and a working ranch does. There'd been Mrs. Foss from the crossing who came 3 days a week till her own knees gave out, and a sour widow named Tilden who lasted a month and told me on her way out that the child was simple and the house was a tomb and she'd not be coming back. She wasn't wrong about the house. I lit the lamp. I made June and me a supper of fried side meat and biscuit, the way I made it every night, and we ate it the way we ate it every night, which was without much being said. And when I'd put her to bed I sat by the stove a long while with my pipe gone cold in my hand, and I did not think about the schoolteacher, except that once, near the end, before I climbed the ladder to my own bed, I found I'd thought, I hope the drover's house gave her a blanket. The nights are turning. That was the whole of it. That was all I let myself. The next morning I had business at the crossing again. A draft horse of mine had thrown a splint, and I wanted the smith to look at the shoe. And that is how I came to be standing in the mercantile when Adeline Wren came in to ask whether anyone had work for a woman who could teach, keep books, write a clean hand, mend, and cook plain. Hollies, who keeps the mercantile, is not a cruel man, but he is a careful one, and he had the council's economy on his mind, and he told her, kindly enough, that times were thin, and there wasn't a family in 40 miles could spare a wage for a governess. And then a couple of the loafers by the Cracker Barrel, there are always loafers by the Cracker Barrel, got their entertainment for the morning out of her. You could marry, one of them said, the big one, Renner, who breaks horses for the freight company and thinks himself a wit. Plenty of bachelors out here'd take a wife to cook, though. He looked her up and down, slow, the way you'd price a mule you didn't intend to buy. You're a touch on the plain side for it, ain't you? And no spring chicken. They generally want them young and easy on the eye. The other one laughed. Hollies told them to mind their mouths, but he laughed too, a little behind his hand, the way men do. I watched Adeline Wren take that the way she'd taken the empty platform. Her chin came up that same level inch. Her color didn't change. And she said, in a voice clear enough to carry to the back of the store, I have found Mr. Renner, is it? That men who can be spared from useful work to comment on a woman's face are generally men whose own faces have never once earned them a wage. I'll trouble you no further." And she gathered her things and walked out with her back as straight as a fence rail, and left the Cracker Barrel quiet behind her. I'd not meant to follow her, but I had a thing in my chest I hadn't felt in 2 years, which was the wish to be on somebody's side. I found her outside by the rail, and she was not crying then either, but she had her hand flat against the side of the building like she needed it to hold her up, and she took it away quick when she saw me. "Mr. Marsh." "Renner's a fool," I said. "Everybody knows it but Renner." "It's of no consequence," but she said it too fast. I stood there turning my hat in my hands. I want you to understand that what I said next I had not planned. I had ridden in for a horseshoe, but I'd lain awake some in the night, and the thing that had kept me awake, I realized standing there, was the silence in my own house, the silence in my daughter, and a notion that had no business in the head of a man who'd sworn off hopping for anything. "I've a girl," I said. "6 years old, her mother's been gone 2 years. She don't—" I stopped, started again. "She's gone quiet. The doctor says it's grief and there's no medicine for it but time, and we've had time and it ain't worked. I can't teach her, I can barely talk to her." That cost me something to say to a stranger in the street, and I think she heard the cost in it. "I've a spare room. It was meant for— it's empty. I'd pay what I'm able, which ain't much, for a woman to keep the house and teach the child her letters and her numbers and how to—" My voice did a thing it hadn't done in a long while, and I had to stop it. "How to be a girl again. If you want honest work and a roof, it's yours. If it's not proper, I'll understand. There's an old aunt of mine in the next valley I can write to make it look right to the busybodies. You'd have a door that locks. I'm not—" I made myself say it. "I'm not Renner." She studied me a long moment. I have thought since that what she was reading in my face was the same thing I'd read in hers on the platform, whether the cost of accepting was higher or lower than the cost of refusing. She had a purse that wouldn't pay the drover's house past Thursday. I had a silent house and a stone where my heart used to be. We were two people doing arithmetic. "How far is it," she asked, "to your ranch?" 9 miles, up the Stillwater under the Rhone." "And the child's name?" I had not said it out loud in 2 years. I tried, and the words stuck, and I had to clear my throat and try again, like an old gate that won't swing. "June," I said. "Her name's June." Something moved in Adeline Wren's plain face then, not pity, which I'd have turned and walked from. Something quieter and harder than pity. Recognition. As though she'd met grief before and knew it when it stood in front of her in a dusty street with its hat in its hands. "I'll need the front room," she said, "with the lock you mentioned, and Sundays to myself and my wage in my own hand, not credited at the store. And I'll thank you to write your aunt today for both our sakes. Those are my terms, Mr. Marsh." "Agreed," I said. "Then I had better fetch my trunk." That is how Adeline Wren came up the Stillwater to my place, on the seat of my wagon with a foot of cold air between us, the same as the day before, except that this time the trunk in the bed behind us meant something different. Halfway up the valley, a hawk came off the Rhone Range and hung over the water, and she watched it the whole way across the sky and said, almost to herself, "It's a beautiful country." "It's hard," I said. "Most beautiful things are." And she said no more till we reached the house. June was on the floor by the stove with the doll. She looked up when the door opened and she saw a stranger, and she went still as a rabbit, her dark eyes going to me. "What is this? Who is this?" And I felt the old helplessness come up in me because I never knew the right thing. But Adeline Wren did not bustle at her, the way Mrs. Tilden had, full of false cheer. She did not crouch down and aim that bright, awful voice that grown folks use on children they've decided are pitiful. She set her carpetbag by the door, and she looked at the room, the cold neatness of it, a house kept clean by a man who didn't live in it. And then she looked at my daughter sitting on the floor, and she said, in her ordinary level voice, the same one she'd used on the empty platform and on Renner, "That's a fine-made doll. Did your mother make it?" June didn't answer, but her arms tightened around the doll, which was an answer. "I thought so," Adeline said. "The stitching is the kind a person does when they're thinking of who it's for." She took off her gloves, finger by finger, and set them on the table and looked around again. "Well, I'm Miss Wren. Your father's hired me to keep the house and teach you, and I expect we shall both find that strange for a while, and that's all right. I don't intend to be your mother, June, because nobody could be that but the woman who made you that doll, and it would be a poor sort of person who tried." She said it plain, no honey on it. "But I am very good at sums and middling at spelling, and I know 40 kinds of birds and the names of all of them, and if you would like to learn those things, I'll teach you. And if you'd rather sit by the stove a while first and decide whether you like the look of me, that's allowed too. There's no hurry on it." And then she did the thing I will remember to my last hour. She did not wait for June to answer. She turned away, she gave the child her back, which is to say she gave her room, and she rolled up her sleeves and said, "Mr. Marsh, where do you keep the flour? This house wants bread, and I want to know if your stove draws true before I trust it with anything finer." We had bread that night for the first time in 2 years, real bread, and June ate 2 pieces of it and did not say a word, but she sat at the table with us instead of by the stove. It was the smallest thing. I lay awake half the night over it. I won't pretend it turned all at once. Grief doesn't lift like fog. It wears down like a riverbank, a grain at a time, and you don't see it going until one day the channels run somewhere new. The first week June watched her. That was all. Watched her make bread, watched her sweep, watched her sit by the lamp at night and mend, watched her with those still dark eyes the way a wild thing watches from the brush. Adeline let herself be watched. She never reached. She'd say her ordinary things into the quiet. "The bread's gone sour-smelling, we'll have flapjacks." Or, "There's a meadowlark been singing on the corral post since dawn, do you hear him?" And she did not require June to answer them. And so, little by little, June stopped bracing to be required. I was out with the cattle most of those days, bringing them down off the high benches ahead of the weather, and I'd come in at dark and find the house warm and a meal on it and my daughter and the schoolteacher in some new small arrangement that hadn't been there the night before. The third evening, June was holding the skein of yarn while Adeline wound it. The fifth, there was a row of June's letters chalked on a slate, shaky and proud. The seventh, I came in and stopped just inside the door, because I'd heard, through the window, before I came in, I'd heard my daughter's voice. She was asking a question. I couldn't make out the words, but it was the up-tilt at the end of it, the shape of a question, the first one I'd heard her ask of her own free will since her mother died. By the time I had the door open, she'd gone quiet again at the sight of me. She still went careful around me, and that was a grief of its own, that my own child braced when her father came home. But Adeline looked up and met my eye over June's head, and gave me the smallest nod, the way you'd signal a man across a poker table that the hand was turning. That night after June was abed, Adeline and I sat at opposite ends of the table, her mending me with my pipe. And she said, without looking up from the sock she was darning, she asked me today why the lark sings on the same post every morning. I told her I didn't rightly know, but that we might watch and see if we could puzzle it out. That's all it was. But it's the door cracking, Mr. Marsh. I thought you'd want to know it's cracking. Caleb, I said. It came out of me before I'd thought. You can call me Caleb. She looked up at that, and a small dry humor came into her eyes. Then you had best call me Adeline, or June will wonder why the grown folks are so formal. She bent back to the sock. She's a deep one, your girl, still water. There's a great deal going on in her she hasn't got the words for yet. She lost her mother before she was old enough to keep her, and she spent 2 years afraid to ask after her in case the asking made you worse. She said this gently, but she said it. Children carry us, you know. We think we carry them. But a child will go quiet to keep a grieving father company in his quiet and call it love because it is. I sat with my cold pipe and did not trust my voice. I'm not telling you your business, she said, softer. You are, I said, but you're not wrong too. We let the fire crack between us a while. Then she put down the sock and said the thing she'd clearly been working toward. "Caleb, I've kept your house a week. I'll keep it as long as you'll have me. The wage suits me, the room suits me, and the child well. But I'll ask you one thing and then I'll not raise it again." She folded her hands. "You don't speak of her, of June's mother. The child has noticed it. There's not a thing of hers out in this house, not a picture, not a comb, nothing, and a house swept that clean of a person is a loud house to a child. June thinks her mother is a thing she's done wrong to mention. I've watched her swallow the word back twice this week." She looked at me steady. "I don't ask you to grieve where I can see it. That's yours. But that little girl needs to know her mother is allowed in this house, even just her name." I got up and went out. I'll not dress it up. I got up from my own table and walked out into the cold without a coat and stood by the corral in the dark with the meadowlarks post black against the stars. And I shook, the way a man shakes when he's holding a thing down with all his weight and it's bigger than he is. Because she was right, and I had known it, and known it was killing my daughter by inches, and I had not been able to make myself do the one thing, say Ruth's name in our house. Because the last time I'd said it she'd been alive to answer to it, and every silence since had been me keeping her, in some mad way, from being finally and completely gone. The fever had come in the spring 2 years back. It went through the valley and took 3 before it was done, and Ruth was the second. She was a strong woman, my Ruth, strong as the country, and she'd nursed the Havorson children through it and caught it off them, and I had let her go up there to nurse them. I had said yes when she asked me, go, of course go. They've no one, and so when she sickened I knew whose yes had sent her. The doctor was 2 days off in the silver camps. By the time he came she was past him. She died on a Tuesday with the windows open because she wanted to hear the river, and the last thing she said to me, when the fever had her half out of her head, was June. Just our daughter's name. She said it like a question, and I told her June was sleeping and well, and Ruth nodded and went out like a lamp, and I had been holding that name down ever since, because it was the last word my wife spoke, and I could not bear to spend it on the ordinary air. I came back in after a long time. Adeline had not gone to bed. She'd put the kettle on and she set a cup of coffee in front of my chair and did not say a word, and I sat down and I picked up the cup and I said to the cup, not to her, her name was Ruth. "Ruth," Adeline repeated, gently, the way you'd repeat a thing to show you'd received it and would keep it safe. "That's a good strong name. She made that doll." My voice was wrong, but I kept on. "And the quilt on June's bed. And there's a hair comb tortoiseshell in my trunk. I stopped. I put it all away because I couldn't walk past it. I told myself it was for June so the child wouldn't be reminded, but it was for me. I'm a coward, Miss Wren. Adeline. I've been hiding from a comb for 2 years and letting my girl think her mother's a secret." "You're not a coward." She said it flat, like a fact she'd checked. "A coward runs. You stayed. You got up every morning in a house that hurt you, and you fed that child and kept her clothed, and you rode out and worked this hard country, and you came back every night for 2 years. That's not running, Caleb. That's the opposite of it. You only got lost a while in the staying." She turned her cup in her hands. "Grief's a country with no maps. Everybody who's been through it came out by a different trail, and most of us came out crooked. You'll come out. You've already started." You said her name. "How do you know it?" I said. "The country with no maps. You talk like you've crossed it." She was quiet a moment. The lamp hissed. "I had a young man," she said, "back east. We were to be married. He took a fever the winter I was 19, and it carried him off in a week, and I learned what you learned, that the world goes right on indecently and expects you to go with it." She said it without self-pity, the way she said everything. "There was no money after my father failed, and a plain woman of a certain age with no prospects becomes, in the eyes of a small town, a kind of furniture. Useful, easily overlooked. I taught school in 3 counties and was let go from all 3 the moment a younger teacher could be got. I answered your council's advertisement because I'd run out of counties." A dry flicker. "So no, I don't pity you, Caleb Marsh, and I'll thank you not to pity me. We're neither of us to be pitied. We're just 2 people who got passed over by the lives we thought we'd have, and we're making other ones." I looked at her across the lamp, the plain, steady face. the chapped hands, the spine that wouldn't bend on a cold platform or before a cruel man at a Cracker Barrel. And I understood, sitting there, that I had stopped, somewhere in that week, thinking of Adeline Wren as a hired woman and started thinking of her as the bravest person I'd met in years. I did not let myself think any further than that. A man who'd put his heart in the ground does not dig it up at the first kind voice. But the thought was there, and I knew it was there, and I went up the ladder to my bed that night not numb, for the first time in a long while, but only tired, which is a different and better thing. The next morning I took the tortoiseshell comb out of my trunk and set it on the mantel. June found it before breakfast. I watched her see it. She went very still, that rabbit stillness, and then she crossed to the mantel and stood looking up at it without touching it, and I made myself walk over and stand beside her, and I made myself say in our house, out loud in the morning light, "That was your mother's. She wore it in her hair on Sundays. You can hold it if you're careful with it. It's yours when you're bigger." June reached up. I lifted her so she could take it down. She held it in both hands the way she held the doll, like a thing too precious to grip, and she turned it so the morning light ran through the shell, all gold and brown, and then she looked up at me, not bracing, for once not bracing, and she said, in a small clear voice, the longest string of words I'd heard from her in 2 years. "Mama had brown hair like this, the same color, didn't she, Pa?" "She did," I said, "just exactly like that." "I remember her smell," June said. "Like bread and the soap. I thought I wasn't supposed to 'member." I got down on my knees on the floor of my own kitchen so my face was level with my daughter's. "June," I said, "you can remember her every minute of every day out loud all you want. You can ask me anything you like about her any time. I'm sorry," my voice broke clean in two and I let it. "I'm sorry I made it seem like you couldn't. That was wrong of me. Your mama loved you more than anything in this whole country, and the last word she ever said in this life was your name. June, she said your name." My daughter put her arms around my neck, both of them, the doll in one hand and the comb in the other, and she cried, finally, the way she should have been let to cry 2 years before, and I held her and let my own go with it. And across the room, Adeline Wren turned to the stove and busied herself with the kettle and gave us our backs, which is to say she gave us room, and the bread browned in the oven. And outside on the corral post, the meadowlark sang the same 5 notes it sang every morning, and the door that had been cracked came open. After that things changed faster, the way a thaw runs once it starts. June talked. Lord, how she talked, once she'd been let. All the questions of 2 backed-up years come spilling at once. Why does the river freeze at the edges first, and what is the brightest star, and did her mother like winter, and could she have a kitten? And why did Mr. Wrenner say Miss Wren was plain when Miss Wren was the prettiest lady June had ever seen? Adeline laughed out loud at that one, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and June, delighted to have caused it, said it again twice. She trailed Adeline through the house chattering. She fell asleep at night being read to. She started slowly to come to me too, to climb in my lap of an evening, to ask me to lift her to the comb, to tell me what she and Miss Wren had seen on their bird walks. My daughter came back to me, and the woman who'd brought her back sat at the other end of my table mending socks and pretending she'd had nothing to do with it. And I will tell it straight, since I'm telling all of it. I fell in love with Adeline Wren over the course of that autumn, the way the valley fell into winter, which is to say without any single morning you could point to and say, there, that's the day it turned. It was in 100 ordinary things. The way she pushed a wisp of hair off her forehead with the back of her wrist when her hands were floury. The way she'd argue a point with me at supper, sharp and dry and unafraid, and then catch me half smiling at her arguing and go pink and lose her place. The way she sang under her breath when she thought no one heard. She had a low, true voice, and she sang old hymns and older ballads, and June would freeze and listen. And so would I in the next room, with my hand stopped on whatever I was doing. The way she'd taken my silent broken house and my silent broken child and asking nothing, expecting nothing, made them live again. But a man who has buried his heart is slow and clumsy at digging it back up, And there was a thing in the way, a thing I'd built over 2 years, and it was this. I believed, in the deep root of me, that I had killed my wife, that my yes had sent her up the hill to the Havorsons, that a man who'd done that had no right to want a second happiness, and that, more than that, and this was the true cold fear at the bottom of it, if I let myself love again, the country would take her too, the way it took Ruth, to balance the books on a man who'd been careless with a gift once before. I never said any of this. I hardly let myself think it in words, but it sat in me like a stone in a boot, and it kept my mouth shut all through that autumn when 20 times I might have spoken. Adeline knew. She knew most things, but she never pressed it. She held to her terms, her own room with its lock, her wage in her own hand, her Sundays. She kept a careful, proper distance even as the three of us turned, in every way that mattered, into a family. And I have wondered since whether she was being only proper, or whether she too had buried a heart back east 19 years before and was no quicker than I to risk it again. Two people doing arithmetic. We were good at arithmetic, the both of us. We were cowards at the other thing and too proud to say so. The first snow came in early November, a soft one that melted by noon. The second, a week on, stayed. By the end of the month winter had the valley by the throat, the still water frozen bank to bank, the cattle pulled down into the home pastures, the roan range gone white and savage against a low gray sky. I'd laid in wood and beef and flour for the season. We were snug. The three of us settled into the deep quiet of a frontier winter, the long evenings by the stove, June between us with her slate, Adeline reading aloud, me whittling or splicing rope, the wind walking around the eaves like it wanted in. I was, for the first time in 2 years, something close to happy, and I was too much a coward to say even that out loud, and that cowardice nearly cost me everything I had left. It was the third week of December, the day before the shortest day of the year, that the storm came that I have measured every winter since against, and found them all gentle by comparison. It came down off the Rhone in the early afternoon with no more warning than a hardening of the light and a smell in the air like cold iron. I'd seen those skis before and I knew what was in them, and I went out to get the stock into the lee of the barn and the shed, and I told June, who wanted to come help with the horses, that she was to stay inside with Miss Wren, and she pouted but she minded me, and I went out into it. It took longer than it should have. A heifer had got herself cast in a draw and I had to rope her out, and the wind came up while I was at it till I could scarce see the barn, and the snow came not down but sideways, a white roaring wall of it, and the temperature fell like a stone down a well. By the time I had the last of the stock penned and fed and the barn shut, the afternoon had gone to a howling dark, and my hands were past feeling, and I fought my way to the house on a line. I'd had the sense to string between the barn and the porch, hand over hand, and I came in the door half frozen and roaring for them to put more wood on. And the house was warm and bright, and Adeline turned from the stove with her face the color of the snow outside, and said the words that stopped my heart. "Caleb, where's June?" The world went very slow and very clear, the way it does at the worst moments. "She's with you," I said. "She went out to you." Adeline's voice was steady, but I heard the bottom drop out of it. "An hour passed. She said you'd want help latching the chicken house against the wind. She said you told her. I thought, Caleb, I thought she was with you. She put on her coat and her mittens and she went out the back. I watched her get to the chicken house. I watched her. And then the snow came down and I couldn't see, and I thought she'd gone on to the barn to you. I thought she'd done it for me." That was the thing that hit me in the chest like a horse's kick, even in that first second. My daughter had gone out into the start of a killing storm to help her father latch a door, because she'd come back to me enough to want to help me, and the chicken house was 40 feet from the back door, and she had not come back from it, and there were 40 feet of white roaring nothing between that door and a 6-year-old child, and beyond the chicken house was open country, and the frozen river and the Rhone range, and a person could walk wrong by 10 degrees in that whiteout and walk straight out of the world. I did not panic. I want that known, not for my own credit but because of what Adeline did, and I want it understood against what I did. I did not panic, because panic is a luxury and I'd no time for it. I grabbed the long coil of rope off the wall and tied one end to the door post. Hard, 3 turns and a knot Ruth's own father had taught me, and I shouted at Adeline over the wind to keep the lamp in the back window and feed the stove, and on no account, come out after me no matter how long I was gone, because 2 lost in that was worse than 1. And then I tied the other end of the rope around my own waist and I went out into it. I will not make a long tale of the next hour, because I lived it minute by minute and most of those minutes were the same minute. The white, the roar, the cold that was not cold anymore but a kind of burning, the rope paying out behind me, my own voice gone hoarse shouting June, June, into a wind that took the word out of my mouth and tore it to nothing 6 inches from my lips. I got to the chicken house. She wasn't in it, but the door was latched. She'd done it. She'd done the thing she'd come out to do. My brave little girl had latched the door and then turned to come back, and the white had swallowed her sense of which way back was. I cast in a circle from the chicken house, the length of the rope, sweeping. Nothing. I pulled in and recast in a new line. Nothing. The cold was in me now deep, and I knew with the part of my mind that stayed cold and clear at the bottom of everything that I had perhaps minutes, that she had been out near an hour already, that a child that small loses heat the way a coal loses its glow, fast, and then all at once. And down at the bottom of me the old stone spoke, the way it had spoken for 2 years. This is the country balancing its books. You let yourself be happy. You should have known. It took Ruth and now it will take June, and it will leave you alone in the snow with your 2 graves, which is what a careless man deserves. I want to tell you I fought that voice off with faith or courage. I didn't. I was going down under it. I'd quartered the whole circle the rope would reach and found nothing, and I was on my knees in the snow with the wind screaming and my hands no longer my own, and I had begun, God help me, to believe the stone, to believe the world was simply taking back what it had loaned me, and that there was nothing in me strong enough to stop it. And then a light moved in the white. It was the lamp. It was the lamp from the back window, and it was moving, swinging low and steady, coming out from the house along a second line, and behind it, bent into the wind. One hand on a rope she'd tied to the same post mine was tied to, the other holding the lamp up high as she could reach, came Adeline Wren. She had not stayed in. She disobeyed the one thing I'd ordered her, and she'd done it with her head, not her heart. She'd tied on. She'd brought the light. She'd reasoned that 2 lines cast from the same post could sweep twice the ground, that a child blind in the snow could not see a man but just might see a swinging lamp. She'd done the arithmetic even then, especially then. Caleb, I heard it thin under the wind. Work your line to the river side, I'll take the range side. She'd have turned downhill. A child turns downhill. She was right. She was right, and I'd been quartering the high ground because that was where I'd seen her last, and a frightened child in a whiteout does the easy thing, the downhill thing, the thing the slope under her feet tells her to do. I lunged to the downhill arc of my rope's reach, sweeping, and Adeline swept the lamp in a great slow arc on her side. And on the 3rd sweep, I will hear it the rest of my life, on the 3rd sweep I heard, under the roar, thin and high and nearly gone, the sound of my daughter crying. She was in the lee of an old half-buried stump down toward the river, curled small, the snow already over her boots and creeping up, too cold to walk, too cold almost to cry, and she had crawled there because some animal sense in her had told her to get small and out of the wind, and that sense had likely kept her alive the few minutes more it took me to reach her. I had her up against my chest inside my own coat in a second, and her face was white and her lips were going blue and she didn't speak. But her arms came up around my neck, both of them, and gripped, and I felt that grip with my whole soul, because a grip is a living thing's grip, and my daughter was a living thing yet. We followed the ropes back. Hers and mine, twin lines to the same post, the lamp swinging ahead in Adeline's raised hand the whole way, and we fell in the back door into the warm and the light, the 3 of us in a heap on the floor, And I got June's frozen things off her, and Adeline had blankets warming at the stove, and we wrapped her and chafed her hands and feet, working fast and not talking. Two people who'd done the cold arithmetic and now did the warm one. And slowly, the color came back into my daughter's face. And the blue went out of her lips, and she began to shiver hard, which the doctor would later tell me was the best thing she could have done, the body's own fire coming back up. And at last she opened her eyes and looked up at the two of us bent over her and said, in a small, cross, outraged voice, "I latched the door, Pa, I latched it good, but then it got all white." And I laughed. I laughed, and the tears ran down into my frozen beard, and I held her and I laughed. And Adeline laughed too, the both of us laughing the way you laugh when you've stood at the edge of the worst thing and stepped back from it. And June, not understanding but glad to have made the grown folks laugh, laughed too. And that is the sound I'd been missing for 2 years, my child's laugh in our warm house, with the storm shut out. And I knew in that moment, on the floor, soaked and freezing and laughing, exactly what I wanted for the rest of my life, and exactly how close I'd come to letting cowardice keep me from it. We got June warm and fed, and finally, near midnight, asleep, tucked in her mother's quilt with the doll and the tortoiseshell comb both on the pillow beside her where she'd asked them put. The storm raged on outside, but it had lost its power to frighten me. It could howl all it wanted now, with the three of us inside and accounted for. Adeline and I sat by the stove in the deep middle of that longest night of the year, both of us still now and then shivering, with coffee gone cold in our hands, and for a while neither of us said anything at all. We'd used up the day's words out there in the white. Then I said, looking at the fire, "I told you not to come out." "You did. You came out anyway." "I did." She turned her cup. "I judged that you were a man who'd been alone in the snow long enough for one lifetime, and that you'd lose your head before you'd find her, looking in the wrong country with the wrong heart. So I brought a light and a second rope and a clearer head." A pause. "I'd not have come out blind, Caleb. I tied on. I'm no use to that child dead in a drift either. Always the arithmetic." But her voice wasn't steady now, the way it had been on the platform and at the Cracker Barrel and through all that long autumn. It had a tremble at the bottom of it at last. "I have never in my life been so frightened as I was when you didn't answer the first 3 times I called your name out there. I thought I'd lost the both of you. I thought I'd have to walk back into that house alone and live in it." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "And I found I could not bear the thought of it, living in it without you. Either of you. And I have spent this whole autumn telling myself I was a hired woman in a hired room with a lock on the door. And out there in the snow I learned I'm a liar, Caleb Marsh. I'm the worst kind of liar, the kind that lies to herself. I had buried my heart under a cottonwood for 2 years and built a stone over it, and that stone had near gotten my daughter killed by keeping my mouth shut all autumn, and I was done with it." I set down my cup. "Adeline," I said, "I have a thing to tell you, and it's an ugly thing, and I need to say it before I say the other thing, so you'll know the whole of what you'd be taking on." And I told her. About Ruth, about the Havorsons, about my yes that sent her up the hill, about the 2 years of believing I'd killed my wife, and about the stone, about the cold, mad fear that had been at the bottom of me all autumn, that the country balances its books, that if I let myself love her openly, the way I'd come to, then the world would take her too, the way it took Ruth, and leave me with a third grave on the rise. I told her how that fear had near beaten me out in the snow, how I'd been on my knees believing it, believing June was being taken to balance my accounts, until her lamp came swinging through the white and showed it for the lie it was. "Because the country doesn't keep books," I said. "There's no balance in it. There's just luck, good and bad, and the people who'll tie on a rope and come out in the white after you. Ruth dying wasn't a punishment, and it wasn't my doing. She went up that hill because she was the bravest, kindest soul that ever drew breath, and she'd have gone whether I said yes or no. And I have insulted her memory for 2 years pretending her courage was my crime." My voice was breaking up again, but I held it together long enough. "I loved my wife. I will love her till I die. And I have fallen in love with you, Adeline Wren, slow and complete over a whole autumn, and I've been too much a coward to say it. I'm not a coward anymore. I used it all up out there. I love you. I want you to stay not as a hired woman in a locked room, but as my wife if you'll have a guilty broke-down rancher with a stone he's finally setting down. Only if you'd want it. Only if you'd freely want it. Not because the snow scared us. Because of the autumn. She was crying now, plain, steady Adeline Wren, the tears just running down her plain, dear face without a sound. The way I imagined she'd cried alone for 19 years in 3 counties where she was furniture. And she reached across the little space between our chairs, the foot of careful air we'd kept between us since the first wagon ride, and she took my hand in both of hers, the chapped, strong hands that had wound yarn and baked bread and held a lamp up into a killing wind, and she said, I buried a heart back east when I was 19, and I told myself I'd never dig it up, that it was safer in the ground, that a plain, overlooked woman had no business hopping. And then a hard, quiet man stopped his wagon for me on a cold platform when the whole rest of a town drove past, and gave me a roof and a child to love, and his own buried heart to coax up out of the dark. And I have been digging up my own without even knowing I held a spade. She pressed my hand hard. Yes, Caleb, freely, with my whole clear head and my whole dug-up heart, yes, I'll stay. I'll be your wife. I'll be that little girl's, not her mother, never that, but I'll be her Adeline, the woman who chose her on a cold floor in the snow and will choose her every day after. Yes. We were married in the spring, when the Stillwater ran free again and the meadowlark came back to the corral post. The valley folk came up for it, even the council, even Hollies, and Renner kept his fool mouth shut for once. But the wedding I remember isn't that one. The wedding I remember happened a few mornings after the storm, before any preacher was sent for, at our own breakfast table, and it was June who performed it in her way. She'd been quiet that morning, thinking, the way she did still water, deep current. And part-way through her flapjacks she set down her fork and looked from me to Adeline and back, very serious, 6 years old and grave as a judge, and she said, Pa, is Miss Wren going to stay forever now? She is, I said. If that suits you, June, it's your home too, you get a say. My daughter considered this with the full weight of her 6 years. Then she climbed down off her chair and went around the table to where Adeline sat, and she stood there a moment. And then she did the thing I will carry to my grave the way I carry Ruth's last word. Only this one's a thing to carry gladly. She reached up and took Adeline's hand in both of her small ones, the way you take hold of something you didn't mean to let go of, and she held on, and she said, looking up, I picked you. Out in the snow, when Pa found me, I was so cold I thought I was dreaming, and I dreamed you came with the light. And I picked you then, so you have to stay. I already picked. And then, fierce, in case there was any argument in it, I'm not letting go of your hand till you say you'll stay forever. Adeline Wren, who had been told by 3 counties and a Cracker Barrel and her own long lonely years that she was plain and surplus and easily overlooked, looked down at the child gripping her hand, and could not, for a moment, speak at all. And then she got down off her chair too, down on her knees on the floor of our kitchen so her face was level with June's, the same as I'd done over the comb, and she said, Then I'll never make you let go, June. I'll stay forever. I picked you too. I picked you that first afternoon when you showed me your mama's doll, and I saw what a deep, good heart you had under all that quiet. We picked each other. That's the best way there is to make a family, better than how most folks do it. And June, satisfied, climbed up into Adeline's lap right there on the kitchen floor and looked over at me, and patted the floor beside them with her free hand, the other still wound tight in Adeline's, to tell me to come down too. And I did. I got down on the floor of my own kitchen with my daughter and the woman who'd raised the both of us back up out of the cold ground we'd been living in, and June put my hand and Adeline's together, small ceremony, small hands, and pronounced us, in her own words, all the way a family now, and that was the wedding that married us. The preacher in the spring only made it legal. June had already made it true. I'm an old man now, telling you this from the same house, though it's a bigger house than it was, with rooms we added on over the years for the children who came after June, 3 of them, and June the eldest and bossiest of the lot. Adeline's hair went gray a long while back and so did mine, and we are neither of us plain to the other and never were, whatever a fool at a Cracker Barrel once said. She's out in the garden as I tell you this. I can hear her singing under her breath, the old hymns and the older ballads, the way she did that first autumn, and I still stop whatever I'm doing to listen, the same as I did then. Ruth is up on the rise under the cottonwood, and we go up there all of us of a Sunday and tend her place, and June, who's a grown woman with children of her own now, tells those grandchildren about the grandmother who made the doll and wore the tortoiseshell comb, the bravest, kindest soul that ever drew breath, who went up a hill to nurse sick children and never came down. And we say her name out loud, all of us, in the sunshine, the way names ought to be said. There's no shame in our house around the dead and no silence around grief. Adeline taught us that, the first autumn, with a darning needle and a cup of coffee, and the simple terrible mercy of telling a frozen man the truth. I buried my heart once under that cottonwood and built a stone over it, and I'd have lived out my days a numb, careful man with a silent child if a plain schoolteacher hadn't been set down on a cold platform by a town too foolish to want her. And if I hadn't, by the grace of something I won't pretend to understand, turned my team around. People ask me sometimes how I came to marry Adeline, the young ones especially, who think love ought to arrive like a thunderclap, and I tell them the truth which they never quite believe, that I didn't choose her, not first. My daughter chose her, on a kitchen floor and again in the snow, with both small hands and a grip that wouldn't quit. June picked her and held on and wouldn't let go, and a wiser man than I once was knows enough, when a child takes hold of the right thing with everything she's got, not to pry those little fingers loose, but to get down on the cold floor beside her and take hold too and stay. The meadowlark's on the post again this morning. It's the same 5 notes it's always sung. We never did puzzle out why it sings on that one post and no other. Some things you don't get to know. But I've learned to sit still and be glad of the song, which is more than I could do that first cold autumn, and which is, I have come to think, the whole of what a good woman and a stubborn child can teach a broken man, if he'll let them, that the light comes back, that the door comes open, that you can build a home a second time, out of nothing but grit and plain kindness and the willingness to turn your team around, and that when the small hand reaches up for yours, in the snow, in the kitchen, in the long cold middle of your grief, the only sane thing in all this hard and beautiful country is to take it, and hold on and stay.